welcome you to our latest webinar on deep dive and reporting. Hopefully this webinar will provide you with the opportunity to reflect on the key areas that were faced in schools and colleges and help you to support your staff and the teaching. We like our webinars to have some participation, so start by muted, which is what most of you are doing already, and then we'll ask questions as we go through anyway. Okay, so first of all, a bit of an introduction.
Have you got the control, Andy?
Yeah, I'm just requesting it now.
Yeah.
Okay. So here we go. Obviously, both of us, myself, Andy, and Becky Howie, both have a background in education, both from teaching and from a senior leadership perspective. So. There's a saying that bad data is worse than no data at all, and that's because bad information, when it's assumed to be true, can be lead to, as you're aware, lead to a waste of time and resources as you're traveling the wrong direction. Good, accurate data will lead you to following the correct path and making good factual conclusions. Data, we hear it so many times, and the idea of what we're trying to help you understand today is just making sure the actual importance, as you all know, about accurate data, and obviously bringing together the facts, the figures, the observations and everything. It sounds very easy and straightforward, but actually, as you're aware, successfully collecting and interpreting and reporting the data is key, and that's why it's so important. The better data, the more knowledge and understanding, and the better you're able to, as leaders, make good strategic decisions. It also helps you identify and address the issues, and it also helps you on a positive note of identifying the high performers and what they're doing differently and helping you then direct people and signpost them in that direction. And most of all, having the key data is very much about time saving, so that we're very much as a company about making people efficient and time saving. The term deep dive is obviously one of those phrases that seems to have recently appeared in schools and colleges. And as you're aware, the phrase showed up in the 2019 inspection framework with the quality of education judgment. It obviously combines the idea of teaching, learning, assessment and outcomes. And it's supposed to develop a more holistic approach. And I don't know if any of you have actually gone through that process of Ofsted regarding this. And it's about viewing standards, especially focusing now on the actual quality of the education. In an education sense, it's more or less, as you're aware, about what you're intending to do, what you're actually going to do, but more or less about the impact as well. And as you're aware, it comes down from the idea of the leadership and the senior leadership level, focusing on a subject area and the overall picture. It's focusing from a subject leader and department level, where it's reviewing the long and medium term thinking and planning. It goes in and actually deep dives into more judging about what's actually happening at class teacher level, where it's actually looking at the books, it's looking at observing what's happening in lessons, and it's actually looking at the planning, and it's also involved the discussion of pupils. So from this collection of information, a judgment is able to be made on a single subject, and from that judgment on a single subject, it actually comes in as an indicator of how the actual whole curriculum. So it's very key to actually get this deep dive more or less sorted to help going forward. Now, I'd like to now pass you on to my colleague Becky, who will explain how School IP can help effectively identify the deep dive process, and also about how you're able to retrieve key reports. Okay, over to you then, Becky.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, so how do we do that? I'm just going to nip out of this presentation and I'm going to log in to our training site, which is set up with some data. Now, just as I mentioned earlier, on the link, on the invite link that I sent today, I also sent a link to the guidance around all of this, which looks like this, if any of you have opened that. And if anybody needs it again, just let me know. So first, the information around all of this, there's an insight on our website, and then I'll put this webinar recording on this link here, so you can refer back to that and share that with any of your colleagues at any time. And the area that I'm logged into now is our training site called Courses One, and we've set up an area for IP deep dive English, one for maths, one for D&T, and then we've set up one for Jessica Upton, who is the deputy head, who in this scenario, in this school, is the line manager of all the deep dive areas. Now, remember, this is just a model of the suggested use of school IP for deep dive, because Andy and I were talking and we were saying that, you know, quite a lot of schools are still working out what their process is going to be. No doubt they're going to be different at this time, and no doubt they'll be different moving forward. So just bear in mind that these are suggestions. The information that goes on in this guide tells you how I've set mine up and what settings I've ticked to enable certain areas to be shown or hidden. Okay, so it will give you an idea, even if you don't follow this model exactly, of how you can follow your own. And also, Andy and I are always here to support you, match it more bespokely to your own models. So I hope that makes sense, but let's go on then, and I'll have a look anyway. So I'm logged in as an administrator. Remember, Jessica Upton is the line manager, but I can see everything anyway. So I'm going to go to my staff. Now, the idea of a deep dive, obviously, is that it's not set against an individual member of staff like these, but it's actually set against the curriculum area, as you'll know. So we've set up some staff members, not for an individual, but for a deep dive area. Now, we've called them deep dive English, deep dive maths, deep dive D&T. What you would have to do, you'd have to, if you wanted to use this kind of model, you'd have to prefix yours with your school name, because obviously you can only have one that's called deep dive English, one that's called deep dive maths. So I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to just click into the deep dive English and we'll have a look to see how this has been set up and some of the tools that have been used. Okay, so the first thing that you might notice is that it kind of looks like the work area of an individual, but actually we've labelled it for the curriculum area. So you set it up in the same way as you would set up a staff member. You also might notice that we've got areas here on the inset menu that are similar to the ones that are for the individual. But for this deep dive area, we've taken some of them away. So we've tinkered around in the settings for this user group, the deep dive user group. So they won't see performance management objectives because then it's not necessary. They won't see standards and they won't see CPD. Now, again, that's our model that we've said we don't think that's necessary for deep dive in Deventio Academy, but you might want to see them. Okay, so the idea around this is that you can turn things on or off depending on what work areas that you're setting up. So the first thing I want to show you is the collaborators. So you may or you may not have had a play and started to use collaborators for your individual staff members, but we thought this was essential to add collaborators for a deep dive area. So remember, it's the deputy head in our model who is the line manager of all deep dives. That's Jessica Upton. Okay, but we've made the collaborators every other member of the SLT, as you can see from their job titles. Now, you might want to make your collaborators, if you're in a really large school, all of the members of that particular curriculum area, for example, and you want to make them collaborators. And the purpose of the collaborator is that you can give them an insight into this area, but we can set those by going to what next, add collaborator. Let's say Harry is another SLT member we need to add in, and we can set what they see by giving them the correct rights here. So we've already said that we haven't got any performance management objectives, so I'd leave that blank, but I would like them to see the blog but not manage it. I would like them to view and add evidence. I would like them to just view the monitoring. And we haven't got any standards. We've got areas for development. I want them to view and I want them to be able to add those. And so on and so forth. You would give them the rights for those collaborators and then save that to add them in. And that's the way we get them. So when Barbara logs in and Michelle log in and Mark log in, they're going to get the My Staff and they're going to see English Deep Dive as a member of their staff. Does that make sense? I'll take silence as consent. Are there any questions about any of that? Okay, so adding collaborators we feel as though would be a benefit here in a deep dive area. And then obviously the monitoring. So the monitoring obviously is against the curriculum area rather than the individual. And we've developed deep dive monitoring forms. So we've got one for learning walk, one for lesson observation. We've got an Ofsted styly one. We've got work scrutiny. Okay. And you can see the examples of all of the deep dive forms we have. If you're an administrator and you can see settings, and they're in performance management and monitoring. So if you're logged into one of these courses sites, you can see them all here. You can see them all in monitoring forms. And you can start reviewing those if you wanted to. So if you come away from this session, you think, yeah, that is something I want to start doing myself. You can start with perhaps reviewing the monitoring forms, and you might want to use them as is, or you might want to use them as a base and then start creating your own, and get in touch with us and we can create those for you. Okay, so that's where they are if you want to have a look at them. And how they work in the deep dive area is the same as any other monitoring activity. They would be applied to this area by going to What Next and Add Monitoring, and then you would select the correct form that has been assigned to this area. So you'll only see the relevant ones, you won't see any of the others. And then you would type in your focus, let's say spring term, how often you do a deep dive, and whatever you call it there. Okay, set the observers. In this case, Jessica Upton as the department head and the line manager for all of the deep dives is going to be the observer this time. Whoever else you choose to be an observer in your deep dives, it might be the department head, for example, or it might be the deputy head as we have, or the head teacher. Nothing to link it to there. The purpose might be developmental practice. We could add in here. So I added into our purpose. I've added in deep dive here. Okay, and then we can add that in and then complete that. And a completed one, let's have a look at this learning walk. Looks like any other form that you might have on already, but obviously you're not answering it against an individual, you're answering it now against the whole department. So changing your answers as you work through the form, assessing that curriculum area, maybe putting a few final comments and using the areas for development tool. So I really like the areas for development tool, and that gives you the planning for the next steps in that department. So to add an area for development in would simply to click add, type in that area, any actions which will be for that deep dive area, any support required, and then adding that in. Okay, so just close that. That takes us nicely to that areas for development, which is going to then start forming the list of all of the next steps. So
thank you, appreciate that.
We can see all of the ones that have come.
No, I've seen that. Where do you want me to put
Oh.
this?
Can you hear background noise?
I've got to get to the doctors in the afternoon, so I'm sitting off.
Oh, Susie, is that your mic that?
Becky, you've turned yours off.
Don't know how that happened. So as I was saying, it's easy to do, isn't it? turn on and off your mic. So as you can see, the areas for development are indicated here, coming from the observation form by the little eye icon, as you'll be used to. And then at any time, all these collaborators, if they've been given the opportunity and the user rights to add in, then they can add the areas for development for this curriculum area, and it will build the list. Okay, and then only the people who've been given the rights to then manage the areas for development can then review these at relevant areas throughout and change the status, so therefore changing the progress. Okay, so as with all other areas, and if you're using this for an individual staff member, you can always add evidence at any time, like we always normally do. Add a file, add a text, add a URL in support of an area within the work area. So let's just call that evidence of, and this is some observational evidence, or I might insert a photograph that I've taken, or I might be inserting a web link or a video even. Okay, and this is the magic where I add it to perhaps my monitoring form, or I might be adding a piece of evidence to an area for development. And so as with all other areas, where you see a closed paperclip, that's where we have that link of evidence. And then again, as with all other areas, all of the evidence gets popped into the evidence folder, okay, where that evidence is linked back, or not linked, because this has all been uploaded in order to share, which we will go on to in a minute. So has anybody got any questions or queries so far? Okay, so before we go on to the activity feed, I'll just point out interim reviews. So interim reviews in terms of the deep dive area can be used for regular monitoring of that deep dive area, or perhaps to record meetings. Okay, so however regularly you need to monitor the deep dive, you would go to what next, add interim review, put the title, so deep dive review November. Might put some details there about what my focus is, for example. I might want to add some further notes there. You don't have to add all these areas in, but what I would probably want to do is start assessing my monitoring, particularly if it has grading, and I probably would have looked at that before I started my interim review. Any areas for development I can review here whilst we're in the interim review, and I can start to change that status, and then put my comments in and the appraiser's comments in, and then agree that. I'd probably put the password override button on there, that we didn't need to put the passwords in. So there is a setting to put the password override on there for those interim reviews. This is a way of recording a snapshot of our monitoring activity of where we're at with our interim review at that moment in time. So finally, let's have a look at activity feed to see how that can be utilised. So as you'll know from using School IP, the activity feed gives a chronological order of events of activity that we undertake here. So here you can see my evidence, my gobbledygook evidence that I've uploaded there, and then it automatically shares that with all of the collaborators that have been set in this system. Okay, I can go back into that at any time and I can change that. I can change the users who that's shared with if I didn't want to share it with all. Okay, and then only the users that I've shared it with, again, like the rest of the system, they will then get an email and they will see that in their sharing feed, which we'll go into in a minute once we've done with activity feed. But as I scroll down, you'll see that we've been using activity feed for the deep dives in a different way. It's to share information and share resources, share examples of best practice. So Jessica, as the deep dive lead in school, she's been sharing within these areas here. She's also been asking questions and she wants responses. And she's also been uploading meeting minute agendas, links, for example. There's a blog there, there's a toolkit there, for example. So she's been sharing, mainly it's to be sharing information. And the way that we do that is to go to what next, add blog, subject might be deep dive news, and we can link it to several areas throughout our deep dive area. So let's say it's on learning objectives. The type is deep dive, and then we can type in some news or type in a link, a picture or a video. Before I do that, I might want to then just check on the sharing. Remember, it shares with all of the collaborators automatically, but I might also want to share that with other departments or my school. So I might want to share it with the whole of the deep dive department and the English department. I'm going to add that in. So when you share it with other people, they get an email and they get that in their sharing feed. Okay, so it will here we go. So it starts there. That's the deep dive news that I've shared with the English and with the deep dive. Okay. So if I wanted to use this sharing feed, and we're sharing right across school, and I want to identify just my deep dives, I can select on the staff member and I can just be able to just, here we go. Just select the deep dive member, which is not looking for some reason. Just select on department. Staff member. For some reason it's not allowing me to filter on that. But it should do. It's probably because we're on the courses site. You should be able to then let me just see if it was the date. I think it could have been the date. Bear with. No, it's not the date. Okay, I'll sort that out. But you should be able to then filter and just then filter for your deep dive information. Okay, so that sort of brings me to the end of how it's set up and how we envisage using it. The actual how to clicks and sets up, as I say, is in the guidance here that was shared with you. Are there any questions or thoughts or your ideas or anything to contribute to see how this would fit in with your idea of a deep dive?
I've got a question, if that's okay, Rebecca.
Yeah, sure.
So this obviously you set this up as like a deep dive view. How does that correlate to people's individual view where they've got the performance management and everything already with lesson visits?
Yeah, it's seen as something that is different. So it's seen as set against the subject rather than the individual. So what the way that we've set it up and the way that we've suggested on here, this model, is that the individual will still get the performance management work scrutinies and lesson observations, etc. But perhaps it might only be the deep dive lead or the head of department who will use a similar form but not the same form to monitor and analyse the curriculum area. So it runs alongside it. It doesn't replace it.
So would it be the question I'm asking really is, at the moment, and I don't know whether other colleagues are the same, but we would use the same. You'd go to your My Work area and you'd obviously use that for performance management targets and things, and then also for anything to do with any other monitoring. Would this actually not be added into that as well? Would it be on something separate? Because I could see that being a bit of having to log into something in a different way might be a bit complicated. Or have I misunderstood what you mean?
Well, it would be separate in the purpose of just analysing the curriculum. Would you then want to sort of link it back to the individual to say, well, this is your target?
I was thinking more in terms of whether it was just going to be a completely separate thing that you were clicking into, because obviously I understand what you're saying about the whole area targets might not be an individual target. It was how that would appear, and whether it would appear as an additional tab that you could click into. If you were part of the English department, you could click into that rather than it being an individual one.
Yeah. So say if you were part of the English department, so let's go back to this idea here. So let's go back to one of the deep dives and let's click into English. So collaborator here, let's say this is your English department. Okay, so Barbara Standing will have her own performance management area, as you'll know. So I'm going to log in here as Barbara Standing. And I'll show you what she will then see. So what Barbara will see, if she wasn't a line manager before, now she will get the My Staff. And now she will also see the deep dive, because she has been given access to those. So she doesn't manage the deep dive because that's Jessica Upton, that's the deputy head. But now she has a wider list of staff who she's involved with. So if she now wanted to see and contribute to the deep dive English, she would be able to see that, and she would only be able to contribute it along the lines of the user rights that she's been given. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So she would be involved in both. She would be involved in her own. She would she's a line manager, but also now she is a contributor, a collaborator into the English deep dive. Oh, hi, I can see a hand up there.
Yeah, I was just thinking, do you view it a little bit like a subject lead's file? So
yeah.
The subject lead's got all their information there online rather than.
Yeah, it is pretty much like a subject leader's file, but and we can invite others in to view and contribute to that as they will. And I guess with it being online, it gives you, obviously the extra functionality of recording the interim reviews, allowing it to share with others, etc.
Can I just say something, Becky? I think how it developed was we had some schools that came to us and they'd created their own form, and what they'd done is they'd done various questions on this form, but then at the top of the form they'd actually put all the members of the department, and when the questions, and we had words with them, they said they don't want it against a particular person. they wanted it against a department was through a way of doing it. So there's been a few schools that have gone off in slightly different directions regarding collaborators. In secondary schools, it has been the collaborators have been the members of that department. In primary schools, it's obviously been, like, as you just mentioned, Susie, more of an area for subject leaders to put all their information. So when they're monitoring against a particular subject, instead of it coming on appearing against some person, they wanted the whole picture. So you're very right when you said, Susie, it is more like about finding a place that more or less puts your subject leader folder, and everything about the subject leadership goes on here. So the idea about identifying, so they might do some monitoring, identifying some self-reflection about what the next steps of the monitoring will be, what's it identified, and then that in turn helps then inform the school development plan. So it was actually an area that was just specific against the subject. So hopefully that clarifies that bit, Susie.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so unless there are any further questions, I'll show you the kind of information, the data that you can pull off from these areas. So I'll go back into the deep dive. So at any time, you can go to What Next and click on Reports. And we can make a selection of what we want to pull through here. So I'll select all. We can generate it as a PDF, HTML. HTML, by the way, can be downloaded as a Word or an Excel document. So if you want to manipulate it further, you would choose HTML. But I'll generate that as a PDF. Okay, and then you can get a report of all regarding the English deep dive. So here are the collaborators, what their roles are, all of the monitoring that's taken place, and if there was any grade on that, if it's been submitted. You can even print out and download all of the activity feed, so you can see how active people have been and what kind of information they've been sharing. And then it will report on all of the areas that we've selected there. So areas for development and what status that they're in, any SDP activities and any interim reviews. Okay, so that's all within that work area in What Next and then Reports. And then we've got the reporting on the left-hand side here of all of the monitoring. So that is the same as before, but it's just being aware of using the filters to filter the kind of data that you want to pull out to analyse. So for example, we might just filter on the department, and we've set up a department called Deep Dive, and all of our deep dives are in this department. So I can just look at all of the deep dives from all departments, English, Maths, D&T, etc., etc. And that will give me an overview. Okay, I could go on to having a look at a particular form for that deep dive, but I'm going to focus down and I'm going to add another filter in, and I'm going to say, let's just have a look at the particular deep dive area. So it's staff member, and then I want to have a look at just deep dive maths, and I'll search for that, and then that will now narrow that down, and it will just show me the information I want in that table, which I can export into Excel if I want to there. But I can start to look at these overall performance criteria and questions. Okay, now I might want to focus that down even more by looking at a particular form. And I'm going to have a look at the lesson observation, deep dive. I'll search on that one. Okay, so now this is where quite focused data can be analysed. Obviously, we'd have more to be able to compare and contrast as the year went on, but the question breakdown is particularly a useful report, because we can then have a look at each individual question. And obviously, when we've got more data, we would see how many has not been graded, how much is transformative, how much is developing, etc. All in these particular areas to get an overview. And as these question forms are building up, obviously it's going to give us some percentages on where we're at throughout the year. Each time we do a form, obviously these percentages of transformational, embedded, developing and not graded are going to be changing in these particular questions. And again, as far as downloading and analysing is concerned, we can export that into Excel, Word, PDF, selecting the data that we want, or we can go to What Next and we can print a report of this filtered information that we have now. So we can print that or we can export that, and that will print that out for us. We can also have a look at any question comments with as opposed to these filters here. And if we decide that we're going to push out a monitoring form, let's say every half term for all of the deep dive areas, if it goes beyond the date that you set it, this is really useful because then you can see who has completed the deep dive monitoring forms and who haven't, and then any who have not been allocated any deep dive. Okay, so any of this information, once we have our filters here, and this goes for any of these reporting areas. If you haven't done this already, this is really useful to do. You can save your reports as quick buttons like we've done here. So for example, here, if I'm particularly interested in maths deep dive lesson observations, I would save this filter, dive lesson observations. And I would share that with anybody else who has the My Reports button. And I'm going to create a quick filter, giving it a unique colour and saving that. So there we are. So then anytime then myself or anybody else needs that report, they don't have to reset all of those filters again. They can just click on the button and it sets them for them. Okay. So the other areas for monitoring that will be useful for a deep dive is the areas for development. So you would need to have the rights to see CPD, and obviously areas for development will need to have been started in order for you to see that area. And again, it will be a matter of setting the filters to see the analysis for the deep dive that you want to. So the reason why I might want to see the areas for development is that we might need to put on some CPD training, or there might be one departmental area who's doing really well in one area who can support another. So I would, again, search on my department, for example, if I wanted to view all deep dive areas for development. And I would do that if I wanted to compare, well, how is English doing? What have English said that they need? Is it the same as maths? Can we do some cross-curriculum training here for deep dives? So I would analyse that, or I might just want to filter even further, like we did before, by finding the staff member and then selecting one of the deep dives, so I can just now analyse my English, at which point I can export that, I can print that out. Okay, but the most important area for deep dive is analysing to see if any needs CPD and CPD support. So CPD activity or course could be assigned and suggested at that point. Okay, and then the final area for reporting, which is supporting the deep dives, is if you have your development plan set up, and then if you have objectives set for the departments like we have here, or if you have activities set up underneath the objectives. So let's say we want to just now view the development plan for a particular area. We would use the filters by going to the department that we particularly wanted to have a look at and searching for a particular department. So let's see. Oh, I've just got some. Hang on just a second. Should just return some data. Here we go. So this here formulates the maths school development plan targets. Okay, so whether they are objectives here or whether it's sitting behind a whole school one. Okay, we've got that maths one there. It will pick it up from that filter, whether it's at the objective stage or whether it's the activity stage. And if we go back, we can then again save that filter. And in fact, we've done it there, called it maths. So then we can bring back just the maths department SDP plan. Okay, and again, like other areas, we can go to reports. 3 types of plan here. So the strategic plan is a very wide overview, narrowing down to the strategic overview, narrowing down to the granular, where we can generate a PDF or an HTML. HTML, remember, you can download as an Excel or a Word, or save it. And then we can get an overview of the SDP objectives and activities that are just for the maths department. So here, look, it's just saying that's there for the maths department, and then who they're assigned to within the maths department. Okay. And you can download it here.